Hi, it's Sally-Shakti, Star Priestess and Visionary Writing Guide, and welcome to Writing and Thriving for Visionary Writers. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Jess Moriarty from the University of Brighton. We're going to talk to Jess today about autoethnography and get into some of what is autoethnography, the differences between autoethnography and autobiography. We're really going to dive into creative nonfiction and memoir writing. And Jess is going to tell us to begin with how you got into this field and what it means to you. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Sally-Shakti. Yeah, hello everyone. My name's Jess and I teach creative writing at the University of Brighton, where I'm course leader for the MA in creative writing. And a lot of my work, I guess, is around storying the self and how we can centre creative and evocative writing in conventional academic research as well. So yeah, that's probably more. Oh, and I'm co-director for the Centre of Arts and Wellbeing at the University of Brighton as well. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Jess. I love what you said there, particularly what stood out to me, storying the self. That's something that I think broadly all of our listeners can be really interested in. And then there's that niche part about how do we do that within an academic context as well. So can you start by going wide with storying the self? What does that mean to you in your practice, or what you're seeing out there?
So when I first started teaching creative writing, I suppose it's that idea of that we are often drawing on aspects of ourselves, our experience to inform our creative practice, whether that's our prose writing, our life writing, our artwork, whatever our creative practice is. Often it's coming from an autobiographical sense of the world, of ourselves, of our relationships and things as well. So I don't think all writing is autobiographical because, of course, we draw on the imaginary as well. But I do think there's always something rooted in something known to us or something we understand to be true, I guess, too. And so this idea of how the different techniques, the different methods, the different approaches to how we do take aspects of ourselves and use it to inform our storytelling is something that I'm really interested in supporting my students with. But also something that I'm interested in myself. And it does relate to autoethnography, I suppose, because as with all writing that draws on autobiographical lived experiences, there's an ethical dimension. There's kind of an ethical dimension to ourselves, and also there's an ethical dimension to the people that we're writing about as well. So I think Carolyn Ellis talks about, revealing intimate others. And for me, there's something about storying techniques and storying that when we think about our own lived experience as a story, rather than thinking about notions of truth, I think authenticity is one thing, truth is maybe something else, and they're kind of complex interpretations and to think about when we're doing our own creative work. And so that's why I'm interested in storytelling, modes of storytelling, techniques in storytelling, of how we can draw on lived experience, but also use those techniques to think about it as story instead of just trying to kind of write stream of self-conscious journaling, and kind of just revealing the self on the page, which we always reveal ourselves on the page, but not getting too kind of bogged down in these notions of kind of truth or wanting to hold up an exact mirror to lived experience as well, I suppose.
Great. I mean, again, there's so many places we could go with that. Writing, especially in an academic context, and maybe for a lot of people out there who are listening who are writers, there comes a point where we begin to realize that writing itself is a form. I talk about it a lot as being, it's a material form. It's a resistant material. Words and language are a resistant material. I remember in schools they teach resistant materials, and they're working with wood or like plastics and physical things that you can mold into shape. But I would say that language is a resistant material that we're working with as well. It has its edges, it creates boundaries, it shapes our experience. And so in that sense, it's never exactly just a transparent mirror to the world, or a transparent mirror to our experiences. We all speak in a particular geographical language, for example, that shapes the way that we think and the way that we structure our ideas and our sentences and our beliefs about the world and ourselves. So how do you then work with somebody who wants to write about themselves? What kind of advice do you give them to start with, to kind of start grappling with some of these ideas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And just to say as well, I really agree with what you're saying about language and form as well. So the first thing I often ask is why they want to write this story, so what is it about their story that they're kind of driven to kind of express in whatever form? And then that would be kind of a second question: what form are you interested in taking? And again, why? What does that open up? What are the challenges of that? What are the kind of the joys and motivations? Why is it right for this project? And then there would at some point be a discussion about the kind of ethical dimension as well. Whose story is being told? How is it being told? Is there an issue of consent? At the very worst case, are there legal ramifications for putting this story out into the world and things as well? Not that would ever make me think that I would stop somebody from telling a story, but it would certainly kind of throw up other questions that were, potentially really creative to work through, and that often offer really creative solutions as well. So why, how, ethical kind of considerations as well, and also thinking about kind of, I never advise people to write for a reader or an audience, but certainly thinking about where they feel their writing is in the world, I guess, as well, is also a question that I would want to ask. So those are the kind of more creative questions. And then if it's linked to academic work, often, unfortunately, we are kind of interested in output, impact, contribution to knowledge, and things like that as well. And within autoethnography, often I am thinking about, okay, so it's drawing on a lived experience, and then what is the kind of research, or what is the community or group under study that this work's going to connect with, and how is this story going to be told as well? So there's some of the kind of the first questions that would open up a conversation.
Thank you. So you've mentioned there, you've brought back in this concept of autoethnography, which I'm still not entirely sure if I'm 100% clear about what it means. And I'm not sure if all of our listeners will know what that term means. Break it down for us a bit. And I think I'm beginning to pick out from the threads of what you're saying some differences between autoethnography and autobiography, but could you make that a bit clearer?
Yeah, absolutely. So autoethnography broken down in a very basic form. So auto is about the self, ethno is about a kind of group understudy, and graphy is the research. So when I'm thinking about autoethnography, those are the three kind of points on the triangle that I'm trying to think, and how they all work together and feed into each other as well. And I suppose it's I don't want to be one of those people that goes, let's go back to the very beginning. But when I joined academia, and I was going to do a PhD, and I said I was going to write something creative. So way back then, it was like, absolutely not. No, thank you. We've got no interest in you doing anything creative. You need to write a thesis, and so, and obviously I'm really pleased to say that, now the boundaries of academic writing in thesis and journals and other publications as well are kind of being pushed and widened, and slowly but surely, very slowly I might add, academic writing is becoming more diverse, democratic, innovative. There's still a long way to go. I'm not kind of utopian about that. But for me, it was kind of thinking about, well, I teach creative writing. I want to write creatively. This academic, conventional, traditional academic writing is of no interest to me, and hardly anyone seems to read it unless you're, a very kind of, a highly established, often male writer, unfortunately. So I started looking at other methodologies and approaches, and I had this moment. I went to this conference, and a friend of mine had said, "Oh, you should go and see this guy talk. He's really good." when I looked at this person's profile, they were a sport, and I was like, oh, why would I go and see him? This is going to be, but you know, natural people pleaser. I was like, yes, I'll come along with you to see this person. And so Professor Andrew Sparks started talking, and it was like this ray of light, you know, the epiphany moment when you're like, oh, this is it. This is what I'm doing. You know, often when you're doing a PhD all the time, somebody says, oh, I'm doing this, and you go, oh yeah, I'm doing that too, or I'm doing, and but it was that. I'd been doing that for a while, but this was the eureka moment when it was like, that is what I'm doing. And I still actually, Andrew is very, he's just written a paper that he shared earlier this week about some of the questions we need to think about with autoethnography as well. So he's somebody I really go back to quite often in terms of somebody who has a very clear idea about autoethnography that aligns with my ethos as well. And for me, it was about how you could apply a methodology that does support lived experience, creative writing in different styles and genres, but have that as the emphasis in academic work rather than, I mean, one of my supervisors said, well, if you do any creative writing, it'll have to go in an appendix. So, you know, and I didn't want it in an appendix. I wanted it to be front and center of the work I was doing. So for me, it was just a way of centering creative writing in my academic work, and also doing that writing that we all know. I mean, academic writing can do this as well. I'm not dispelling a place for conventional academic writing, but you know, it's that Laura Richardson talks about writing as a method of inquiry, and also that idea of writing to move through something or to feel differently about something and to transform, but also to hopefully elicit a emotional response in the people that we connect with as well. And emotion doesn't have to be, you know, crying or upset. It can be joy. It can be, oh yeah, that's slightly what happened to me, although mine was a bit different, or whatever else. You know, the power that art has on us, I guess. So that was how I came to autoethnography, and why I had to come to autoethnography, I suppose, as well, because it was a way of ticking boxes in my academic career. That meant it wasn't just ticking boxes. You know, it meant that I got to do the work that I was interested in and wanted to do, but also could do creative work as well. So yes, and again, as I say, that was a very long time ago. So, you know, now I'm working with people who can have autobiographical writing or graphic novel or performance poetry or exhibition or whatever else as the main component of their thesis and their academic works. So, you know, I'm very conscious that that is from a very different time, thankfully.
Wow, it's great. It is great that things have changed so much, and I've also witnessed that change, you know, through in my journey through academia as well. And you know, when I was writing my thesis, the poetry was about 1/3 of the component, although poetry, especially my poetry, is quite sparse linguistically anyway, so it couldn't have possibly made up much more than that. But the poetry was about 1/3, and now I'm coaching people who are also leading with the creative edge of their writing. So let's talk a bit more about this, about autoethnography. For understand, it seems to be an autobiographical style of writing that is located within a wider kind of research parameter.
For me, it is. So different people will have different takes on it. But so yes, so you were saying, what is the difference between autobiography and autoethnography? And for me, the difference is that there should be some kind of explicit research context. So, you know, we might read. So I'm just thinking of Lem Sisay's fantastic autobiography. You know, many of us will read that and think, well, this is also social science work. It's psychology. It's creative writing. It's history. You know, it's politics. You know, it's all, and it is all of those things. But you know, Lem Sisay has written an autobiography, and I think it is something about the choices we make as writers. What form am I working in? What is the style that I am working in? And to feel confident and powerful about that as well. But you know, with autoethnography, I think the research context is more explicit. So rather than somebody saying, "Oh, you know, this could be that," it's making sure that it does amplify the kind of contribution to knowledge and research, rather than it being, as with all creative texts, I would say, you know, we could look at a painting or somebody dancing and explain how potentially it could have a research context. But for me, it's that explicitness with autoethnography, I would say.
And so would you also, you're talking about Lemn-Sissay's autobiography, do you think it's also important in autobiography to bring in social context, and again to kind of let it not be a transparent mirror into a sort of journaled self, but to have a wider context?
I mean, they're the autobiographies I'm interested in reading, but I'm interested in also, how people come to write what they write and what they think their writing is about, as opposed to what a reader might infer from it, I think is a really exciting space. So I don't have a kind of, autobiography should be this, or this is the only valid kind of autobiography for me. I like the idea that the boundaries of writing are sort of, as Bart said, kind of blurring all the time. And I see that as a really positive thing. And I think, one of my students at the moment is writing erotica and kink as part of their thesis. And once upon a time, that would have been like, well, how... And when I started, so this is going to sound like I'm protesting too much, but when I started reading in that genre, because the student, had directed me to it, I was thinking, how are we going to get a research project out of this? But very naturally and very quickly, it was realised, and there's lots of work in that field going on, I should say, as well. So I think it is. It's not for me to say this is what this form or genre is. I've got an idea of what I think autobiography is, or life writing is, or memoir is, but actually I think it is about people writing in those ways to say this is what I'm doing and why, and for that to be celebrated. And certainly things like rules or that wouldn't be autobiography, I'm always a bit more playful with, I guess, because I'm quite interested in people pushing at those and knocking some of those things down as well.
Well, that's exciting, I really feel that those people who are working with you have a very a beneficial and beautiful process to be able to work with you through some of these questions and your openness to their explorations. Can we go back a bit to the beginning and drill down a little bit more into then storying the self?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you, and how do you approach that with a student, for example?
So actually, interestingly, so for me, a lot of the storying the self that I've been doing has come out of my autoethnographic work. So often when I'm writing autoethnographically, I am talking about other people in my life, and that just started to become more and more uncomfortable for me. So I'd written poetry about my experiences of being pregnant, but now my children are teenagers. Well, in the same way they don't want me to take their pictures and put them on social media, they wouldn't read my academic work, but I feel instinctively, it's not my place to put them directly in that writing as well. So I became more interested in this idea of storying. So I've been doing some work recently with Vanessa Ma, who mainly works with stitch and textile. And we wanted to write about our experiences of working at university, and the pressure we felt that was particularly gendered. I mean, obviously, all sorts of people feel marginalised and undermined in academia, and as a white middle class woman, I'm definitely not in a group that is particularly marginalised. I'm very conscious of that. But we wanted to write about our experiences, but also we didn't want to get sacked. So we decided to write ourselves as witches in a fairy tale instead. And we talked about having to do all this domestic work in order to keep the castle going, and the expectation of looking after the people in the castle and things, as well as doing all of our other work too, while these wizards who lived in the very top of the castle in their towers got to do all the important magical work. And yeah, so and of course, you know, fairy tale is something that we've all grown up with, is hugely problematic in terms of patriarchy and representation, and there's lots of work around, you know, restoring and adaptation. So is that story autobiographical? Yes, it's drawing on autobiographical experiences. Is it true, authentic? I've mixed it up with, you know, tropes from fairy tales, so I've got that distance from it. So the aspects of that story will resonate with people, I think. But also, it's a fiction; it's a fairy story as well. So, and it was just so freeing. It was just so fun, and we would send these stories back and forth to each other and laugh about them, and also discuss our experiences as well and how we felt about them, and the pressure to do, you know, so much more, and wanting to please people, but also kind of feeling frustrated with that, and how it took us away from doing the research and the work that often gets people promoted in academia and things as well. And so, you know, it was restorative. It did feel really positive. Also, we published quite a lot on it. And then, so from that, we went on to the next project we did to write ourselves as goddesses. Because, of course, if you're going to story yourself, why not go for a goddess instead? So I wrote myself as Persephone, and she wrote herself as Demeter. So you know, this practice. So with students as well, when they're saying, "Oh, I want to do autobiography, but I don't want to." You know, I don't want to write about my partner exactly, or I don't want to write about my parents or whatever else. It's a way of discussing how they can write something that might help them feel differently about an experience, but also protect them legally and open up this space of what if, I suppose, you know, what if I was a goddess, or what if I was a witch, or what if I was a fox, or, you know, whatever else it is that gives them that opportunity to draw on something known to them, but also inform their writing with some research in a particular area to create a kind of story of the self, I guess. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
That was wonderful. I really, really enjoyed that, and I never considered going that way. I never considered that you were going to take the conversation in that direction with fairy tales and goddesses. Aside, I've worked with Vanessa as well. She was completing her MA at Brighton the year before I started mine, and she had her final project was all these dusters. It was a Cinderella
Yes.
project. It was all these dusters hanging up. And you got to take a duster and create onto the duster your experience of feminine domesticity.
Yeah.
So mine, there were all these lovely, beautiful stitched dusters that were pegged onto the line, and mine had a massive iron burn, an iron hole burned into the center.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because the first time, so Vanessa got me to do the same thing, and the first thing I did was I stitched my duster to my pajama leg by accident, because I'm such a terrible sewer. And I actually, I'm not an easy crier, but I actually had a little cry, because it was like, I can't even do this duster. You know, I'm a failure, as all that pressure we put on ourselves. You know, I'm not good enough. This is something I should be able to do. And then I just had a really good laugh about it. And then I stitched a picture of a house, and I wrote, I like my house like my men, and underneath it said, a little bit dirty. and it did look like something somebody who had never stitched before had done, but it just brought me a lot of joy, just made me really happy to look at it and laugh. And yeah, so I love Vanessa's work and her project, and how she gets all of those people's experiences with domesticity and kind of these dusters that become these sort of flags of resistance. And I guess that's what our work was as well. It was our own way of doing a little bit of resistance to academia and the aspects of it that we found really difficult and problematic, that we wouldn't have been able to write about if we'd kind of tried to do more autobiography or life writing as we kind of expect it to be presented, I guess.
Now that's super interesting, because we've been just really laughing a lot, talking about our experiences of working with Vanessa and moving into this much more creative, imaginative realm where other things are possible, or you know, we can take our experiences and put them into a context that changes them somehow, that alchemizes them into something different, that we can infuse perhaps more joy and laughter and lightness and shared experience and community into that experience. So now I'm curious, because I also know that when people write their stories as an autobiography, perhaps especially if they've had some challenging experiences to work through, it can be very cathartic. So I'm just going to pose a hypothetical question for you here to consider. Which process do you think is more or less cathartic, or are they similar, or are there differences in those processes and in that practice?
That is a very good question. So it's really interesting. So what I do find is, so now a lot of my autoethnographic work, ironically, because of course auto is about self, but nearly all of it is collaborative. So, and I think there's two reasons for that. One is because I think there is, you know, a critique of autoethnography is that it can be very inward facing, narcissistic. And for me, that collaboration and dialogue is part of making sure it doesn't become too inward facing. And definitely, you know, writing about kind of difficulties of working in academia. Also, I've written about experiences of motherhood and experiences of having cancer and experiences with menopause as well, and my own. I've done writing around my own kind of white privilege. Especially that was in dialogue with a friend of mine who said one of the problems is you going on about it. So that was a really good transformative dialogue. So I find that dialogue is very transformative, and also it does open up this space for not just writing in a kind of my own way without a kind of feedback and critique. I know we all get feedback and critique, whether it's from journal editors or funders or whatever else, but that kind of more immediate back and forth between people. And within that as well comes, so, you know, Vanessa will write something and it will spark something in me. Or I've got another colleague, friend who I work with, and we always walk before we write. And the process of walking and talking to each other stimulates ideas and things that we want to write about as well. So, and in other times like this, you know, we might have a conversation and something might kind of come out of it too. So I find that collaboration, and often the collaboration is in connection with communities, you know, so it might be groups of people that we've worked with as well. So I find that really stimulating and pushes my ideas, my creativity as well. So that's one of the ways of working that I think is very therapeutic and definitely has an impact on my well-being. I think, you know, that there's this kind of very stereotypical view of the writer and of the academic maybe as well, that we're in our little worlds writing with not a sense of the wider world, if you like, which we know if you're a writer, you can't be like that anyway. You have to have things to write about, so you have to engage with the world. But for me, it is just that way of putting me in touch and making me sensitive to what's happening in the world, hearing from other people, and also stops me from getting too bogged down in what I think and what I know to be true. I mean, a lot of the time I want that exploding so that I can discover things, I guess, as well. So yeah, so I definitely feel that collaborative element for me is creative, stimulating, has an impact on my well-being as well. And also motivates me to write as well, because, you know, when you've got somebody else saying, well, should we do this together, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, well, I absolutely will then too. So for me, that's been a massive benefit, and included in that is, you know, the things that I do learn from my students. So when they're writing about their own experiences and experimenting with different ideas and research as well, you know, I learn something all the time from them too. So I just feel I'm very lucky to be working in a methodology where it's really nourishing, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you've really, I think, elucidated a lot about that the benefits of the communal aspect of writing,
Mm.
and I think this is something else that's changing over time, and is also, I think, more in the experimental and the feminine and the you know, not quite in this same white patriarchal sphere of the writer being this isolated genius. There's a lot more connections between people, there's a lot more collaboration happening, and that opens up ideas, connectivity, creativity.
Yeah. Like, do you know, I completely agree with everything you just said. So for a while, I felt like I was doing autoethnography work, but it felt very, actually, do you know, so I was asked to write a chapter for a book called Surviving Sexism in Academia, which is a great book, has got brilliant chapters in. My chapter is not a great chapter. I'm sorry to the editors, because when I read them all, the other chapters are very creative, inspiring, heartbreaking, uplifting, and I realized my writing had stagnated. And that was when I sort of that's an individual chapter, and I realized I needed that dialogue. I needed that challenge, that bit of resistance of, well, why are you writing like this? What does this mean? What about this? I needed that kind of constructive feedback and dialogue around it. And I needed to discover new things about people and about communities and about research, new things about kind of ways of techniques and ways of working that maybe were unfamiliar to me. And in doing so, new things about myself too, because we're all transforming, we're all evolving, hopefully, and yeah, so absolutely, that for me was a really stimulating part of what I do.
Yeah, and so what I'm thinking of when you're speaking is, I recently interviewed a publisher outside of academia, and they focus a lot on what they call multi-author books. But what they do in the back end of that, like behind the scenes, is create a lot of community around the writing together. So I think perhaps that's something that's still missing from the way that an academic anthology is compiled, because you're still pretty much writing in isolation, and then you submit your chapter and you don't see what everyone else has written until the book comes out. And then there's this opportunity where you've had this experience, you said, oh, everyone else has written something quite different to me, whereas perhaps some more community in the writing process might have actually uplifted everyone's contribution and uplifted the book.
I mean, you're talking about a kind of ideal way of working, and also that time of valuing the I don't know stage of writing as well, and of research, I guess, too, because more and more we are driven by, even when we suggest a research project, well, what are you going to find out? What are the outputs? How is this going to have an impact? And of course, that doesn't create time and space for, I just don't know. I've got this idea, but I have, I don't know enough about it. And I think, that is really problematic. And as we kind of, how contracts and HR and how the landscape of HE is changing in the UK, in England certainly, to where the pressure to do more and more with less time in our contracts and things for research thing, not everywhere, but certainly in some institutions, that it's making that risk and that creativity very difficult. Like, I know at the moment I'm writing a chapter with a student, and we've kind of got all these bits and we know something's there, and at the moment we're just keeping writing and trusting in a process. But of course, part of that is quite alarming because we do have a deadline. So that time for, where are we going with this, or what do we think is emerging from this, or what is working and what isn't working here? Where have we failed? Not that, that time is getting more and more squeezed out, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that is the essence of the creative process. It's being in that unknowing and staying with the practice, so that it can lead you to something perhaps. But of course, I do think deadlines are also an important part of the creative process.
Yes.
It's that container that actually brings shape to the project and says, okay, this project has a completion, and it has to take this form, because otherwise a project can stay, or even a page can stay blank, or a project can stay nebulous, if there isn't some constraining factor that actually brings it into form.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it depends on what kind of writer, creator, person you are, but I do benefit from a little bit of discipline. I do benefit from even if, so often I'll put in deadlines with the people I'm working with. So even if I know the deadlines, July, I'll want deadlines leading up to that, just so it feels like I've got that kind of positive pressure of getting the work done. And also, I think it's because often for some of us, and not even, as I teach creative writing, and I struggle with this as well, is the writing or the creating still seems like something that we can't center. So, emails or other things that need to take up space in our lives do. But so even things like putting in my diary writing time, so it just legitimizes it a bit more. It is my job. It is the thing that I love to do, that does make me feel kind of like I am evolving, learning things, developing my skills, and also I've got something to teach about as well, because I do think to teach writing you should be writing, if you can. So I think that is that slight discipline and purpose of what we're doing is important.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jess, as we come towards the end of our time together, I'd like to bring it back again to, I guess, where we started with storying the self, and then this kind of idea that's been bubbling along around catharsis in that writing. If we go into sometimes what I feel from our conversation is that often in a very strictly autobiographical form, somebody might be writing out challenges, difficulties, trauma, and perhaps the form that the catharsis takes is through shedding those difficult emotions, and perhaps the reader might also share some of those difficult emotions, and it might be cathartic, or it may be re-traumatizing for a reader. And then there's another process where you've taken that into a different form, a more magical form, and the catharsis perhaps happens through still a movement of emotion. It seems to be that that's what catharsis requires, emotion to move, but the emotion moves differently. It moves more through more of a levity, through more laughter and joy. Can you say anything about that? I mean, something I'm just throwing out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So one thing is, another critique of autoethnography is that over the years it has become a bit misery memoir. So, often it is about really traumatic experiences that have happened to people, and some people can write about traumatic experiences in a brilliant way. I mean, Lem's Tisse's autobiography is a great example. My friend Claire Best writes about traumatic experiences brilliantly as well, and lots of other people do too. I find it quite difficult because when it's so personal and so raw, and maybe often I'm still not clear how I feel about it as well, and it's the writing that helps me kind of have a sense of it too. But when I did my thesis, I wrote a script, which was a fiction, but it was drawing on lived experiences, and it was about kind of my own struggles at the time with kind of my health and potential and kind of getting pregnant, and also not knowing if I was good enough to be in academia, which is, that's a question I'm sure we all ask ourselves sometimes. But the script now, when I look back at it, I think, God, who is that sad person? But it's out in the world, so the process actually was transformative. It helped me become a doctor. It helped me so already it helped me feel a bit more confident about my role in academia. I actually had 2 children while I was finishing my PhD and stuff as well. So the after story is very uplifting and positive, but the story about me being really at my lowest point is in the world, and that it does make me feel vulnerable. And probably if I could go back to myself, I'd be like, oh, just be careful about what you're saying and what you're writing there. So I think writing about difficult experiences is absolutely brilliant. It is important for lots of people I know, but for me, it's the act of storying. So whether it's using technique, whether fairy tale, in collaboration, or using a particular research approach to inform the writing. For me, that opens up a slightly different space, which, like you say, yes, it's more playful, it's more imaginative. I have to think differently. No, I don't have to think more, but I have to think differently. And to me, there is something really cathartic and positive, and something about a trajectory through my work and my life, I guess, too, with that process too. So that's why for me, this is a process that works. It makes me excited about the work that I'm doing, and I feel there's transformative aspects to it as well. And it puts me in closer, better dialogue with people around me as well. I'm not saying it's the best. I'm not saying it's the only way of working, but yes, for me, that's how I feel.
That sounds like a great place to leave us, on a very uplifting.
Yes.
Just remind people where people can find you at Brighton.
Yes, so if you Google Jess Moriarty, I'll come up, and my email address is on the website and everything as well. And I'm really happy to hear from people about work that they might be undertaking, or questions about anything I've said today as well. Yeah, that'd be great.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Jess. It's been great to chat with you.
Always lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.